Hey everybody, George here from this episode's future. Like a fool, I forgot to plug the most important plug of all at the end of this episode, which is that there will be a live show May 4th at filmmaker here in Philadelphia. I'm really excited about this. I can't imagine it happening very frequently, if ever again. So, I hope that people take advantage of this chance to see the show live. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody, seeing any fans of the show who live in the Philadelphia area. I would love to meet you all, so yeah, check it out, and I hope to see you there. That's May 4th at Filmmaker. The doors open at 6, show starts at 6:30. We're going to be watching Tetsuo the Iron Man with Paul Ritchie, who you might know from Continue or Goosebuds. He's also been on this show many times already. We're going to watch a screening of the movie first and then do a live episode about it right there. So you'll definitely want to take advantage of this and come on by to see it. All right, enjoy the ep.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh. I'm getting ready to watch a video.
You making popcorn?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. Talk to me. Talk to me.
Hi, everybody. I'm George, and welcome to another episode of The Best Little Horror House in Philly, the show where we talk about the best horror movie ever made. According to our guest, at least. And today's guest is a very funny comedian. She also wrote and directed the great short film John Tarzan. Please welcome Max Beasley. How you doing, Max?
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this movie.
Hell yeah. Well, before we get into today's movie, which I'm very excited about, why don't you tell us a little bit about just your general history with horror? If it's something that you're very into, if it's more of a every now and then kind of thing, or if this movie just sticks out in particular among an entire genre.
Sure, yeah. I do enjoy horror. I have written horror, but I think that my taste in horror is pretty specific. I tend to like atmospheric, psychological, sort of dread-based horror rather than, jump scares or gore.
Right.
A lot of my favorite horror movies, or movies that have horror elements that aren't necessarily horror movies. An example of that would be like Mulholland Drive is one of my favorites. Even something like True Detective Season 1 that has elements of sort of a cosmic horror to it, but is a lot of just dread and tension and atmosphere. Some of my other favorite horror movies would be Hereditary, which I know has some classic horror tropes in it, but a lot of it is just sort of atmosphere and tension. And I think something that Hereditary has that this movie we're going to talk about also has is you're always looking for something in the frame, something hidden in the frame that just adds to, and The Shining does this too. Things are just sort of off, and you wouldn't be surprised to look in the background and see something. Can I cuss on this?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I figure people are old enough to watch these movies. They're old enough to hear us swear.
I like a movie where you never know if there's something fucked up back hiding in the trees, right? Like I love Ari Aster movies. I love Midsommar and Hereditary. I love The Empty Man is a recent one that I really like a lot. And I think that has a lot of atmosphere and a lot of psychological underpinnings. I like that sort of stuff. I'm not like a big torture porn person. I do like some slashers. I do like the Final Destination movies.
Classics.
I like stuff like that where it's just kind of fun and campy, but my taste is more sort of like Blair Witch Project, Empty Man, Hereditary, Willow Creek. I would say my guilty pleasure when it comes to horror movies, sort of my favorite subgenre is the found footage subgenre. I'm a big fan of found footage or mockumentary horror. For some reason, it just scares me more than typical horror movies does, maybe because it feels more grounded.
And it's pure atmosphere. I mean, really,
exactly.
It's totally empathetic in that it puts you in the shoes of the person who's holding the camera.
That's very true, yeah. It doesn't feel like you're watching somebody. It feels like you are the person experiencing the horror. I think that is. And, I recently wrote a horror feature that was all about how the scariest thing is actually the feeling of fear itself. And so I think a lot of the things that terrify me are just when people feel very afraid of something happening.
Yeah. Without
necessarily even anything happening, just sort of that dread of something being there, So.
Right, because you assume, they know something I don't. So,
yeah.
So if they're scared, I should be scared too.
Totally, yeah.
Well, the movie we're talking about today is Lake Mungo, the 2008 debut and thus far only film of writer-director Joel Anderson of Australia. It's found a bit of a cult reception over the years, especially because of the format. Do you remember how you first encountered this movie?
I don't know how I first heard about it. I think probably what happened is I was looking at lists of like the best hidden gem found footage movies and came across it, and the first time was a few years ago, alone, late at night, watching it on my laptop with headphones in, which I've heard other people, maybe on Letterboxd or something, say that's the ideal way to watch this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it blew me away. It stuck with me. There are things in this movie that I don't think I'll ever forget about. I feel like people who know about it really know about it,
Mm-hmm.
but it still kind of feels like a movie where I'm like, hey, have you heard of this movie? And it still kind of feels like one that I get to show people. I think, as you mentioned, it being the guy's only movie ever. And also, most of the actors in the movie haven't really done anything else that we would have seen.
Right.
You could realistically convince somebody that this is just a documentary movie.
Sure. Very, very Blair Witch in that way as well.
Yeah, which adds to it, I think.
Absolutely. I think that you touch on a couple of really interesting things in there, which, first of all, the fact that it really is the kind of movie where it's like, all right, I have established the foundational knowledge of horror. I'm ready for the next level. Let me look into what's still there to find for a horror head like me.
Yeah.
Look into these underrated movies, these ones that people aren't always talking about. You find these lists, and every time Lake Mungo is in there, because
Totally.
it is one that people are like, I want to share this movie, and it is still underheard, underrepresented in these conversations nevertheless.
No, you're totally right. It's interesting because I kind of think of it almost like a PBS documentary or like a documentary you would see on like Documentary Now. It just
Right.
feels like a real low budget documentary, and it's astounding to me as a filmmaker myself to think of what can be done with such a limited budget. And I love any movie that, and I think that's another reason why I love found footage, is a lot of the time they're able to accomplish so much with so little.
Definitely.
This movie, either of us realistically could make this movie. I feel like most of
Sure.
it is Ken Burns effect. Right?
Right. You just need a house and
Right.
like a creepy outdoor location.
Right.
And you're good to go.
Totally. So that's really inspiring to me. Obviously, neither of us could make this movie because it's so genius, which we'll get
Right.
into. But it's cool to see somebody be able to create something so unsettling that sticks with you with so little.
Right. Such limited resources. Absolutely. I also do really enjoy, you talked about how it's an effective movie to watch at your computer with your headphones on. And there is kind of an interesting form-breaking wave of movies that have been coming out. This is one. Things like Unfriended and Host, where it's like built around the computer screen, and even Skinamarink recently definitely feels like built to experience in your house at a computer. Maybe it's a really interesting shift in the dynamic of filmmaking, and it's one that is so aware of its own form that it kind of breaks from the pack in a way that is really unique and interesting.
That's true. I haven't really thought about that, but it's interesting. It's almost like the boon of technology or screens in our lives has shifted a lot of these horror experiences from the films that you want to experience with a crowd in a theater. But then these films that I'm interested in, it almost like benefits them to watch them alone.
Yeah.
It's almost like cinema of loneliness, if I could
Right.
coin a term. These movies that I am talking about, I think they lose something if you watch them with another person, because I think a lot of what they do and a lot of why they stick out is because they're so effective at creating that fear inside of you that if you're watching it alone in a dark room, it's the kind of movie where you're like, if I go around into my kitchen right now, there's going to be somebody standing there. Right.
Right.
Which is the scariest thing is if a movie can instill the fear into your life of the thing being real.
Exactly. Just the idea of there being a presence when you know there shouldn't be. But like, if you're watching it with someone, even just knowing that, like, okay, there is supposed to be someone somewhere in the house, like, that immediately negates a lot of the tension of that. And so this isolation that it plays upon, and so often these movies do have themes of isolation in them, I think it really is playing with that and sort of relying on you to build this and meet it halfway, basically, to meet it at the level that it's asking you to operate on.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it's something universally relatable in the terms of this movie. And Paranormal Activity is another example of this. And the feature I wrote has this too, but it's like, if there's a presence in your home, which, you know, it's the classic haunted house trope, but it's just done in such a grounded, realistic way where you're like, oh, this could happen to me. This isn't like classic
shit.
Vincent Price haunted house, you know, elevated camp horror. This is like, what if there really is a ghost, like, you know, in the chair in my room, you know?
Definitely. Part of the initial draw for Joel Anderson was a bit of a fascination with Lake Mungo itself, a lake in southwest New South Wales that began to dry out between 22,000 and 18,000 years ago. Some ceremonially buried remains of an indigenous man and woman found there were estimated at approximately 40,000 years old, with the woman being the earliest known example of ritual cremation.
Wow.
Yeah, so truly history in spades at this location, and the idea of it shifting so much was so interesting to them. They said, the idea that ghosts inhabit a location as old and primal as Lake Mungo, especially when it looks so unusual, it's like an alien and altered space, unlike anywhere else on the planet. And we immediately imagined what kind of celebrations may have had there, what kinds of humans were there, what kind of drama unfolded 40,000 years ago, what kinds of betrayals, what kinds of love, of conflict. Today, it's a dry lake and has been for many thousands of years, but it was once teeming with life. We wondered what inhabitants were left to haunt a location over such a long time frame. And
yeah,
it's just crazy. It's such a wild looking location that it does create that atmosphere immediately as well. This
leads directly into one of my other favorite subgenres of horror, which is Australian horror. There's something about Australia, and I think a lot of it has to do with the mysticism and the scars of what happened to the Aboriginal people. But if you look at something like Picnic at Hanging Rock or The Last Wave, like early Peter Weir movies, or you look at, I just recently watched this movie called The Shout. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
So these movies all sort of deal with that, which is these ghosts are among us in this alien desert landscape and we're being haunted by them. There's something about the Australian landscape and the history there that is just so sort of off-putting. Lake Mungo itself is just, even the name, you're just like, feel kind of weird when you hear that name. It just sounds cursed. You know?
It does. Although sometimes I also think Lake Mungo to the poles.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
So it goes either way, depending on my own particular mood.
That's good. That's really good. Yeah, no, Australian. This movie, I think, couldn't have been set anywhere but Australia. There's I have a quick weird story about watching this movie last night. So that the movie takes place in this little town in Australia called Ararat. I don't know if that's a fictional town or if it's real.
I believe it's real.
My girlfriend got us this sparkling water yesterday. It's a new brand that we've never had before. And I was watching the movie, and then I looked over, I took a sip from the water, and I looked at the brand, and it was called Ararat brand water.
Ah! What the heck?
Yeah.
Wow, you're being haunted by water over there.
Very weird. Yeah, it was one of those things where you're just like, oh, geez.
I also love that. I think that part of what makes this movie so interesting to me is that it is balancing this very interesting ancient terror with also something that is so immediate and now, with the link between technology and the occult. And I think that it's particularly interesting because so many of these movies do use found footage to explore that link. And even the few that do break away from that, like The Ring and Pulse, still do so in a more traditional narrative. And so Lake Mungo kind of breaks free of both cliche dynamics with this faux documentary approach. I think that it just totally sitting in its own unique spot is so interesting.
Yeah, it is. I think the aesthetics of it add a lot to it. I think the fact that it looks so low budget, and the fact that the character, the son, I think his name's Matthew, is using sort of old photography implements to capture this footage, and the video quality of the video cameras that they set up is so low res, and
it's all over the map.
And the cell phone footage is like Nokia, you know, like shitty quality cell phone footage.
Brick cell phones.
But when it zooms in, when it Ken Burns effects into these images in the far background of the frame, the graininess and the sort of uncanniness of this distorted image is way scarier than if it was a crystal clear image.
Mm-hmm. Sure, at one point it becomes a skull and you're like, oh, fuck.
Totally. And even, I don't want to jump the gun, but when it zooms in on the shot of the neighbor's face, there's this distortion that's happening on his face where it looks like his expression is continually changing into all these different sort of haunted, ghostly faces just from the distortion of the video quality. You know, it's pretty crazy. It really, there's just something about that. And, you know, I'm not saying anything new. The old VHS footage or distorted footage really adds to the texture of this, but there's just something spookier about the low quality image than
definitely
if you shot it with, you know, a red or whatever nowadays.
Absolutely. John Brawley, the cinematographer, had a lot to do with this. I read a couple of really interesting conversations from him, and he said Joel was really interested in the idea of apparent visual proof in images and how they can be used as evidence in the documentary form. I think he also liked the freedom of documentary storytelling structure. Unlike the conventional drama structure, where you tend to follow a single character's story arc, aka the hero's journey, with all the storytelling rules that an audience has come to expect, the documentary form allows you to near seamlessly jump between different character arcs within the same film. The tone can unexpectedly shift gears, and surprising story diversions can play out without audience disbelief. You can even have blind alleys that actually lead to inconclusive outcomes and unresolved or unexplained story threads. It's all part of the documentary oeuvre. We're so used to the maxim, a picture never lies, that when it's inconclusive, we're not sure what to make of it. We're able to subvert people's reading of images. Something that initially appeared to be concrete would be undermined by an alternate shot or perhaps a revelation of new information by a character that would cause the image to be read in a new light. And I think that that is what is so fascinating about revisiting this movie in particular, is once the reveal has happened, for a lot of movies similar to this, it's very easy for it to drain the tension.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in this one, because you're armed with this knowledge, it enables you to examine the background in more detail, knowing what to look for almost. Mm-hmm. In a way that only bolsters the movie's effect. You know, as you start to notice things on your own, and ahead of the camera panning and doing the Ken Burns effect stuff with it, it just really makes you feel like you're earning the scares almost.
Yeah, a friend of mine who I had watched this movie described it as Where's Waldo for ghosts, which is funny, but I agree. I mean, the reveal in the movie doesn't tell you everything's all right. It makes you, when the things keep happening, you're like, oh, what it does is it ups the effectiveness of being like, oh, the real shit is real now.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Definitely.
If that reveal didn't happen, it would be like one thing, but that reveal, and then you're like, oh, but then things keep happening. You're like, oh, this is really real now. You know, There's so many sort of reveals or switches or subversions in this movie. The whole thing about the manipulation that the filmmakers are doing, where they're telling you that this image is of one thing, and then later it turns out to be another thing, and it tricks your brain. You know, you see the thing that they're telling you you're seeing, and then later when it's revealed what it actually is, you're like, oh, that's what I was looking at. But you,
of course,
never could have told. You never could have told that. You know, watching it for the first time, you don't see the image, and they're saying it's one character, and you're going, no, that's a different character. That never happens.
Right. It's just a shape, and they fill in the rest of it for you in a way that is really effective.
And your brain, all the best horror, your brain is what is producing all the scariest aspects of the film.
Right.
Nothing that could be shown is ever going to be as scary as whatever you're thinking about.
Exactly. The script itself was really loose with no official dialogue. Instead, it was more of a detailed treatment that discussed the story beats and intent of each scene, with the actors improvising their way through these beats in response to questions from Joel, who you can actually hear in the movie, because they sort of cast themselves as the documentary film crew, only shooting things that would be possible for documentarians, no blocking or rehearsals, that sort of thing. And Brawley commented once again saying, this is a little bit of a long quote, so bear with me. In Joel's mind, this was the key to creating authenticity, to try and shoot scenes in an unrehearsed and even unblocked way. It was the only way to bake in genuine mistakes that sometimes might happen with framing and focus, not to mention awkwardness with actors and staging for camera. All of these are unconscious signifiers and evidence of a real documentary, and it's hard to fake when you try to create these. In one scene that went for close to 20 minutes, we simply shot the counseling session as it happened, with the actors meeting each other for the first time in character and doing a counseling session. Shooting with a single camera, there were no pickups, no extra coverage, and no take two. And we realized during post that we had a significant hair in the gate during all of this sequence. And we decided against painting it out, which was possible, because we thought it was further proof that we shot the scene continuously. The hair is there all the way through it. And yeah, it's the flaws that make that lend credence to that realism, because you're like, well, surely if they were going to fake it, they would fake it correctly.
Yeah, totally. It's so interesting because these are obviously not, Hollywood actors, but it never feels like any of the people in the movie are acting, to me at least. And I feel like I have a pretty good eye for that stuff. It never feels like any of them are acting. It never feels rehearsed. It never feels like they're reading lines. It never feels forced. It all feels so genuine. It's pretty unbelievable.
How believable.
Really, like you can't, you could watch this movie and think it's a documentary for your whole life. Honestly, there's nothing in it that would kind of dissuade that.
Without outside input, right.
And it feels a lot more real than even any of the other sort of ghost documentaries that are out there. Those all feel faker than this.
Sure.
It's pretty crazy.
I think there is a really interesting dynamic that it has about sort of the medium being the message here, with the increasingly complex relationship that photographs, moving or not, have with the truth. This is more topical than ever with deepfakes and AI art copying people's style. And the mockumentary is meant to leverage the realism of the format while also commenting on people's and images' ability to be manipulated. And so it splits the movie's function into both narrative and form. I think that they're each equally fascinating. And it's an incredible balancing act that if either one of them falls, it becomes incredibly boring, I think. But they manage to ride that line all the way through. Yeah,
it helps that the movie is so tight. It's like 87 minutes with credits. It's perfect. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It doesn't really have anything that it doesn't need. It really is just like a concise, consistent statement of what it's doing, creates this mood. It's homogenous all the way through. I almost I don't know that you've ever heard this, but this other podcast I like, they they clown on Alec Baldwin. At one point, he's talking about Woody Allen films and talking about the homogeneity of tone, which is ridiculous. It's so stupid. And I almost just caught myself saying that. But it's true. Like, this movie stays what it is the whole time, and it's so unique to what it is. You don't really feel it being influenced by Blair Witch or past found footage. It really kind of feels like its own thing.
Definitely does. Part of the narrative terror of it for me is its discussion and leveraging of the traditional conservative reactionism that underlies so much of horror. People talk pretty exclusively about slashers punishing behavior. Like, if you smoke that weed or have sex, you'll get killed by Jason Voorhees. Ah, spooky.
Right.
But less commonly discussed is that ghost stories often have the same spirit, so to speak. The Gothic storytelling is often moralizing, not only in the rejection of the person who has changed in this way, but the very act of being trapped between this life and the next is a pretty crazy punishment. And Anderson said that the strange kind of hope that they're stuck in this way, which comes from grief and a desire to have them back, was a big motivator for the story, describing it through Matthew as better than nothing, but then pivoting to the way that relationships and understanding can also change over time and how that might impact their understanding of their own haunting.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting shift halfway through, like you said, not only in it being like, oh, these parts are faked by Matthew,
right,
but also in realizing that there is an actual supernatural element, and then also the family being part of the cruelty of the ending and their own reaction to things being part of it. Brawley, he said, Lake Mungo is exploring how the dead can forever haunt the living. Our knowledge of Alice Palmer comes firstly from the family's own retold recollections, then her photographs and home movies. The aim was to paint a picture of someone from the visual evidence she left behind. Eventually, other kinds of amateur movies reveal a darker side to Alice, and we're forced to re-examine the earlier images and how we see Alice herself, which is exactly what the family goes through as well.
Yeah. And, I think this movie explores something like Hereditary also does. Shining, generational trauma, and also the lead character or whatever version of protagonist that these movies have is a victim of themselves as much as the people around them are victims of this person, right?
Right.
Alice is being haunted by herself, and I think that aspect to this movie kind of puts it over the top, which is sort of the mind-bending, time-bending aspect to this, where it's like, oh, this character is being haunted by their own ghost before they die, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something like Donnie Darko or something. It's like, this is your fate facing you head on, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. Him creating Frank the Rabbit by shooting him in the eye, and then this is the version that appears to him in the past that led him to that. Yeah, absolutely. This kind of recursive surrealism that enhances the other supernatural stuff that's going on, for sure.
Totally. Yeah. It doesn't really, I hate the thing of rules of a world or whatever, but this movie introduces these rules and you just kind of accept them. You're just kind of like, oh yeah, like, it's crazy that this is happening, but also it somehow makes sense. Definitely. It never pulls you out of it by introducing these sort of surreal or mind-bending aspect. The way it leads you, somehow it ends up feeling natural to the progression of the movie, which is so impressive to me. I don't know how they did it. Yeah, a huge accomplishment in its own right. They shot using 40 different cameras to create the various aged photos and videos with formats including 35mm, Super 16, HD, digital Betacam, High 8, Super 8, VHS, and even mobile phones. This determination to get this accuracy across time led Joel to even consider casting a real family so that they could just plunder their actual old family photos. Oh, wow. Although they did eventually decide against that. So I'm not sure if you know, but are all the people in this movie actors, or are some of them non-actors or first-time actors?
I believe that they were just like local actors who he was like looking specifically for people who had that realism to them.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you know, it's not that they're like bad, like
No.
but it's just, it's such a specific performance that they're capturing here. And that sort of reactionism in a good way here, the improv adaptability of it to have the no net of a script,
Right.
I think is really kind of really acting accomplishment. It's very impressive that these actors managed to create this question that we have of, are these actors or real people?
I mean, they feel like real people. I don't think that this movie would work if it had any faces in it that you'd seen before.
Right.
I
Absolutely.
think the immersion is kind of the whole thing with this movie.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, not to divert too hard, but for me, that was like my big issue with Nomadland, is I'm like already having difficulty following Frances McDormand there, and then she's like hanging out in the like camp, and you're like, is that David Strathairn across the way?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help that movie was directed by the daughter of a millionaire steel magnate. You know, it's just inauthentic.
Surely she's very familiar.
Yeah. But
So Brawley also discussed this aging the footage fairly in depth. He said, even during the post-production phase, Joel felt he needed to further degrade some of the home movie footage even further. So I started by dubbing it to VHS repeatedly 6 times. Then on the 7th time, we started up Complete Post's 1-inch tape machine and dubbed it to that. And while it was dubbing, I started yanking on the take up and feed reels of the open reel recorder machine, causing further glitches. After another couple of dubs through VHS, including one pass where I removed the tape from the cassette, crinkled it in my hand, and carefully wound it back on,
Wow.
It was more than 10 generations old and finally to the point where it looked right.
oh my god,
And it does look right. Like, it is
It really
incredibly
does.
well done.
it does, and it doesn't feel like anything that could have been added digitally, even today. You know,
Yeah.
it does feel like found footage.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I love that look. Another movie that sort of did a similar thing is Julian Donkey Boy, the Harmony Korine movie.
Right.
I think they may have like shot it on film, then reverted it to VHS or something, and then blown it up to 35. So it just looks crazy.
Yeah.
I love that. And, a lot of my short films have that sort of like really lo-fi, low quality, grainy, noisy look to them. I love texture in movies, and this movie is so textured. Just the visual aspect of it is so textured.
Absolutely.
It's so rich. Yeah, I don't know. I love it.
It's really great. Shooting began in Ararat before they actually had all their financing in place so that they could create the illusion that they'd spent a considerable amount of time with the Palmer family by getting footage of the township as it changed across all 4 seasons instead of the 25 days of principal photography in November. They drove 3 hours every month or so for about 6 months, which gave them enough material to shoot a mood reel, which actually was necessary to lock down some of the final private financing. So it kind of was like, if they hadn't just gone for it, it might not have happened at all.
Interesting. Do you know what the budget of this film was?
I could not find that information.
Yeah.
I looked pretty hard for it, but you have to imagine it was not very much.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me the budget was under $1 million, I would believe you. Definitely.
Definitely. It was released to mostly positive reception from its limited festival releases. It did build this cult following that we discussed until today, when it is declared the best horror movie ever made. Solved, done, and dusted.
I mean, it's certainly up there for me. It's funny sometimes when you look for this movie, there's this, I don't know if it's on physical release or what, but there's this one poster of it where on the sidebar it's just like scary horror classics or whatever. It looks like a movie you would find at like Walmart, like a cheapy B horror movie. And then you watch it and it's just like, most of it is just like this quiet, like PBS style documentary of talking heads and Ken Burns effect. It's like everything about it is so anti what we think of as like a cheapy horror movie, right?
Right. There's no schlock to this at all.
Yeah, and even when it gets to the big jump scare, there's one jump scare in this movie. When it gets to the big jump scare, it still feels a part of everything that came before it, even though it's loud and horror and in your face. Nothing about it is like, oh, this is manufactured.
Definitely. So we've talked around it. Let's get into the actual movie. Let's talk about this thing.
Yeah.
So it starts off with this opening montage of early 20th century ghost photos, which does emphasize the convergence of the living and dead, as well as the idea of trickery through photography and the nebulous relationship of images to reality. These were popular discussion fodder by both believers and critics at the time, and one of the first examples of photographs having their reputation of absolute truth tellers being punctured by the fact that this was trickery, but also creating an idea that they were more effective as truth tellers because they could see beyond the empirical world.
Yeah.
So it creates this really strange association with cameras as being like more than the human eye, of being able to pass the threshold, despite people being like, oh, this is faked. People said, well, you know, cameras still have this mystical quality to them. It's a really interesting start.
Yeah, which is not new. I mean, there's a lot of horror media about that.
Right.
But this doesn't really feel a part of that because it's so private to this family. You know, it's so personal to them. The specters that they're seeing are their daughter. That it feels like a discovery in this movie, even though it's sort of an old trope. I wanted to mention also with the opening credits, the font of the titles is very like iMovie, like Final Cut Pro 2006, you know?
Yeah.
And it just comes up like Mungo Production. There's no studio logos before it. It just goes right in to this photo in like 480p with the little white font that's like Mungo Productions. And you're like, oh yeah, like some guy just made this documentary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It really adds to it. It doesn't even feel like a movie. It feels like some documentary you would find on like the 4th page of Discovery Plus or something, you know.
And over these photos, a young woman narrates that she feels something bad is about to happen to her or has already happened and just hasn't reached her yet. Another voice says you have to believe you're to blame, otherwise there's nothing to hold on to. Then smash cut from these antique images to a color photograph of your classic nuclear family, mom, dad, son, dog. And this does a great job. Does a great job of creating this gothic atmosphere, setting us up to believe that this is a spirit photo too, although we don't see the ghost yet.
Yeah.
And it begins in earnest. December 2005, a tragic accident began a series of extraordinary events that thrust a grieving family in the small Victorian town of Ararat into the media spotlight. This film is a record of those events. And the Palmer family, who was the subject of the photo, describes the disappearance of Alice, the girl in question that we've been talking about. She seems to have come out of nowhere. They were swimming at the dam. One minute she's there, the next minute she's gone.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the divers find a body on Christmas Eve, 2005. How's that for a present?
Yeah. And may I say, sort of the first real horrific image of the movie, in my opinion, is the photo of her drowned body.
Fucking nasty.
It's bad news. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it
really
comes
is.
back, but the image of her pale face with the gaping mouth on the gurney or whatever, you're just like, oh yeah, this movie is going to disturb me.
Definitely. And Russell and June go down to make everything official, identify this body, but June doesn't go in for the identification, which Russell thinks was a mistake because she doesn't get that closure. This is a big part of the movie, this idea of closure, of not getting it in particular, and how that can make you hold on to things, make you not be stuck in the moment, this stagnation, this purgatory that the ghosts themselves find them in. So too does the family without being able to move on.
Yeah, and this is a thematic thing that connects with me because, you know, I know of both sides where my father's dad sort of disappeared without a trace in the 70s in a private plane while he was hunting.
Wow.
And they never found the plane, and they never found his body. And so for years, my dad thought there was a potentiality that his father was still alive out there somewhere, right? So that's one side of it. You never get that closure. The other side of it is I've been in situations with people where I see them on their deathbed or in an open casket or, you know, whatever it is. And that last image of them does stick with you as sort of a big part of how you see that person, even if you knew them for a long time before.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, even just this little part of this movie has that thematic relevance that is grounded in reality, which is like, do I want to remember this person as this horrifying, you know, drowned corpse, or do I want to remember them as my daughter, but then always sort of have that question mark in the back of my head, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a line that June delivers with some bitter acceptance. She says, "Death takes everything eventually. It's the meanest, dumbest machine there is, and it just keeps coming, and it doesn't care. There's nothing else to know about it, really." And boy, it's just it's an impactful line. It's a very well done moment early on to really get you on their side.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing of a family grieving a loss and grief sort of being a motif, you know, this is something that is in the works of Ari Aster as well, sort of tying that, you know, it's sort of like emotional horror, which I love emotional horror, where a lot of the horror is tied to the person's inner feelings of grief or depression or anxiety or loneliness. And that is sort of the catalyst for this movie, which is this family is sort of all operating out of that mindset, right? And that's sort of
absolutely
what triggers the events to start happening, is their own action.
Yeah. It also, there's a moment here that I think is also thematically relevant where the news attempts to memorialize her. And they say Alice was a happy, fun-loving girl with a zest for life. And there's just something so simplistic about that, about the way that people are flattened out almost in death, and they're smoothed. And this is explored from multiple sources, but just to have even the news this early on be like, this is how she's remembered, like, that is impactful early on, and coming back to it being like, well, she had a lot going on that didn't seem that happy, and you see in photos that she wasn't smiling all the time.
Right.
So this moment where they're saying like, oh, this is who she was. You're like, is it? It, like, you question it immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it firsthand with people that I know, friends of mine who have passed. They either become they sort of become an icon. They sort of become all the best versions of themselves, or celebrated more in death than they were in life, or they become the worst part of themselves and villainized, and that's what everybody remembers, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of your best or worst version in death, and there's no gray area anymore in that.
Right. All the complexity of life gets sucked right out.
Yeah, it's interesting.
10 days later, weird stuff begins to happen. Russell describes strange noises on the roof and in Alice's room, and the door to her room is heard repeatedly slamming. They call exterminators even to be like, is this the noise?
Yeah, it's termites slamming the door to your dead daughter's room.
Termite parents just don't understand. Slam.
Yeah, this is sort of another hint where you're like, oh, I'm in for something here. This is starting to enter the fucked up horror movie territory.
Also, Alice's friend Georgie says the house had bad vibes, which there's no coming back from that.
No, yeah. And, this is another thing where that's sort of a realistic thing to say. I mean, I've entered spaces before that just have a bad energy to them. And, my own sort of belief of when we die, we just become energy and are just part of the energy of the world, whether it's a good energy or a bad energy. Like, if someone's murdered in a room, I fully believe that there could be like a bad vibe in that room, So
Sure.
like, there's just something about that where you're like, oh yeah, like I could see that happening to me. I could see myself saying that, which is another thing where it's just like nothing so far in this movie that's happened is out of the realm of possibility.
Right. And it's like authentic enough where you're like, if she had walked in and been like, it feels like there's a spirit haunting us or something,
Right.
you'd be like, shut up.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
fact that she's just like, it's kind of bad vibes in here, you're like,
Yeah.
of course there's bad vibes.
Yeah, and also it could just be bad vibes of the family is just a bad
Sure.
vibe right now, you know?
Yeah,
Which makes total sense.
definitely. June begins to have terrible nightmares about Alice coming home from the dam still soaking and standing at the foot of their bed staring, to the point where she just walks around for hours at night to avoid sleep, breaking into other people's houses so that she could, quote, be in someone else's life for a while, which
Yeah.
everybody just kind of shrugs that off, which is very funny to me.
It's, again, I mean, something that could totally happen, and it's just sort of a bleak detail about a grieving family where you're just like, oh my God, this is dark, you know?
Yeah.
As someone who struggles with sleep myself and, you know, even has irrational fears of someone in the house or has struggled with nightmares, you know, like, I get it. I get not
Sure.
wanting to fall asleep. And the thing she says of, I didn't want to open my eyes, you know, it kind of mirrors that line in Blair Witch where Heather is like, I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them. Right.
Right. There's no escape in any fashion. And yeah, I mean, Russell, you see him trying the opposite way. He's throwing himself into his work. Doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah. Yeah. And his coworker's like, yeah, I thought it was kind of weird.
Well, not my place, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
But then one night late in February, he hears a noise from Allie's room, and he says, I don't know why, I found myself sitting down in the chair in front of the dresser. And before I could kind of work out what I was doing there, Allie walks in and walks to the desk, shuffles some pencils, and looks like she's checking for a text message on her phone. I was completely freaked out, but she was completely oblivious to my presence. And then I don't know what happened. I must have moved the bed or squeaked my shoe or something. And she went completely rigid, and I knew then that she knew I was there, and she turned around, looked right at me in the eye, it felt like forever, came at me and said, get out, get out. And this is what convinces him, finally. His family finds him sobbing, he's convinced of his daughter's presence, and more importantly, her antagonism, that she is angry at them.
Right. It's very scary to have a room in your house where you're just like, my daughter's in there, my daughter's not in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this like foreboding and this dread and this sort of overlying cloud hanging over you, which like
Right.
has real world meaning, but also in the form of a ghost story. You know, the metaphor of that is really powerful.
Yeah.
And a thing in this movie, a lot of the scares, it's people describing the scary things that are happening to them just in like talking head. And so what you're doing is you're picturing in your mind the scary thing happening. And again, it's scarier. You're picturing the scariest version of that.
Right.
So it's way more effective than if they would have like done some sort of reenactment or something. Right.
Definitely. Oh man, I can't. Imagining this movie with like dramatic reenactments of stuff is
Yeah.
like, oh my God, that would be much worse, I think.
Yeah.
It does also bring up some interesting thoughts as a viewer, because the way that these typically go, a ghost haunts their loved ones until their murder mystery is solved and justice is dispensed.
Mhm.
But in this instance, there doesn't really seem to be a murder or even suspicious circumstances. As far as they know, she just drowned.
Yeah, and I don't know for you if you had this, but for me, like, and I love murder mysteries and I love true crime and all that, but I never felt like any of the family was complicit in her death. I never got that sense.
You know, it's interesting because I feel like they are in a way that isn't like physical.
Sure.
Like I think that they are complicit in the way that they don't know the real her.
Yeah.
And so it is, again, I think to me, it's one of these things where it's like, it's benefited by revisiting, where it's like, once you see this and you can look at it and be like, well, why is this ghost here?
Yeah.
Where is the complicity?
Yeah.
There are like little seeds of it maybe that aren't as foregrounded as they might be in another movie. And I think that is a really interesting way to handle a ghost being stuck somewhere.
Oh, definitely. I definitely agree, and I think a lot of that is like gray areas, which a lot of this stuff is in reality. But I guess I just meant that I never thought the reveal was going to be like one of them
Oh, that
killed
they
her.
killed it.
Yeah,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember specifically, but I don't think that that was the case for me either, where it's like they all felt like they were too much missing her. Like it all felt, because of that authenticity, that
Right,
believability that they're bringing,
right.
you're like, oh, I believe that they are in pain here.
Yeah, and definitely once the guilt um, and the sort of responsibility or complicity that they had in it starts to be revealed, it makes sense. But
Hmm.
it also makes sense as something that maybe they didn't realize was happening until they realized, you know.
Georgie also mentions that Alice and Matt were extremely close and that she, among others, are concerned about his health, mental and physical, after he
Mm.
starts spontaneously bruising.
Oh,
But
yeah.
he, which that is scary. They don't
And
really talk about it that much,
the
but
doctor talking head is like, yeah, these bruises don't make any sense on his body.
yeah. All right, on to the next thing. Oh, okay.
Hmm.
He does start to take a great interest in photography, though. This is his escape. One thing that I really like is that even before we're aware of its importance, they show us some of his early photos, and you can see the experimentation with form, with double exposure, with
Yeah,
what it's focusing on. You can see the seeds of what's to come without even knowing that it's important.
definitely. Some of the early photos have this sort of ghostly spectral quality to them. And I don't know if that's due to the atmosphere of the movie so far, but you can definitely see those early photos and be like, yeah, these are weird photos. They're capturing something that
Yeah.
maybe isn't there, you know?
And so he had set up a project where he was taking a photo of the backyard every 3 months for 4 years. And on April 28th, 2006, the photo showed Alice standing against the fence.
Hmm.
And here's where something very interesting happens to me, is that you can also see something in the garden there, but it uses this Ken Burns effect to zoom in on Alice
Hmm.
as Matt talks about it.
Hmm.
It's really fun by the cinematographer, as discussed. He says that they're pulling that away from us with the shiny ball of, here's the ghost, not there.
Right.
And so when he says, this is the ghost, and you go, oh, well, that other thing must not matter.
We're imagining it.
So we've talked about this Ken Burns effect a little bit here and there. For people who aren't familiar, it's this highlighting by zooming in and around on the photos.
Right.
Something I was reading about it was discussing that because this is a digital gaze produced through nonlinear editing rather than an external camera, it kind of helps to build this sense of visual entrapment, like you're in the confines of the photo despite that movement.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of interesting in terms of being parallel with this ghostliness and everything.
It's true. Yeah. It's like, there are parts. So, yeah, basically, if you've ever seen a documentary and there's a photo and then it's slowly pushing in on something in the photo digitally, that's Ken Burns effect. It's in iMovie and Final Cut.
Right.
So these photos, it sets up this thing in this movie where you're seeing a photo and you're always waiting for that zoom to start. And the thing in the backyard, all these things are in the distance. You maybe don't pick up on them right at first. And then as it slowly zooms in, you start to pick up on what it's zooming in on. And that dread is building. And you're just like, oh God, there's something there. And it's zooming in on it. And I can't stop it from zooming in on it. And so every time you see a photo or every time it starts zooming, you just go, oh, fuck, it's going to show me another thing in this photo. It's so
I hate when
effective.
there's things in the photo.
It's so scary. It's so effective. It's such a brilliant device that I've only ever seen done in this movie. I'm a big, longtime fan of Ken Burns effect. I've been using it since I started making stuff in middle school. To see it used in this way, where you're just like, oh, there's something way back there in this photo that's like 4 pixels in some situations that you would never see unless we zoomed in on it. We're going to
Yeah.
zoom in on it and show it to you, and you're going to come face to face with it. It's so messed up. It's so scary.
It's
so
scary.
effective.
It's really cool. It's very unique. It's a really awesome part of this movie. Matt says that this ghost image improved the mood in the house because it gave them something to focus on. And this is bolstered by the emergence of another photo, this time at the dam, that appears to show Alice standing in the background. And so June and Matt begin to think Alice is still alive. Russell disagrees, having seen the body. Although he begins to doubt himself after June is convinced that he made a mistake. This is when they do a shot of that waterlogged corpse. I do not mind saying it is quite nasty.
Yeah. And it doesn't look like anyone in particular either. It's
right.
When they say like, oh, I could have made a mistake, you're like, yeah, this stuff barely resembles a person anymore. You know?
Yeah. They decide to exhume the body for DNA testing, which is disruptive to say the least, but the DNA does confirm it's her. The footage shows several photos of Alice as a youngster looking extremely goofy until there's one photo of her looking very stern and a little older. And it does this really great job of being like, oh, what happened in between? Like, what brought that change on her? And now that they've confirmed Alice's death, they have to figure out what's going on these photos.
Yeah.
So Matt sets up video cameras in the house, and that first night, right away, they see a figure walk by, and the movie zooms in. But also, way to the right, there seems to be someone chilling. So it's funny to, again, be like, oh, is that someone? Nope, we're zooming in. All right, pull the ball away.
You know, for me, like, or for a lot of people, they may not even see the second presence, which sets up something later in the movie that's very effective. But
yeah, it's really great.
It's this footage of the walking. It resembles the Sasquatch video, the famous Sasquatch video, which to me is very scary. And as someone who's very scared of Sasquatches, that is a video that, even though I know it's fake, haunts me. And later in Bobcat Goldthwait's Willow Creek is a very effective found footage Sasquatch movie. But yeah, the image of someone walking across a hall like that. There's a great part in Exorcist 3 that has that as well.
The classic.
That has like a crash zoom and a sound attached to it. This is the thing with this movie is a lot of these things are either dead quiet or just like a very low hum. Mm-hmm. You know, it's very ambient. There's no like when the person walks across the hall in the footage, it doesn't go like, bah, you know.
Right. They're not telling us it's scary. They're leaving it up to us to be like, oh, that was a ghost that I just saw. That's scary.
It's kind of more effective in that way. It's not signaling the scares, and that adds to you finding the scares, right?
Right, absolutely. June decides to seek the help of a psychic named Ray. He says he's happy to give people the consolation that death is not the end, which of course makes him not a very trustworthy source, which I think is pretty interesting.
And also the fact that he's using a stage name, right?
Right. And during his intro, Ray says, where I come from, when someone dies, they block out all the mirrors to stop the dead from finding their way back, which will come back. So hold on to that, audience.
Yeah. Mirrors are another sort of portal, like a lens that maybe can capture something that the human eye can't.
Right. And so tied to what photography is, you know, a series of mirrors letting in light and everything. And during their first session, June goes into this trance and she gives him the guided tour of their house. I really like the way the images of the house interior are set up to go with these like narration moments. Mm-hmm. I find it very scary.
Mm-hmm. It's like Lost Highway, the slow creeping down the hallway.
Yes, exactly.
You know, or The Shining, like even if nothing's there, just the fact that you're moving closer to potentially something is where the fear comes from in those instances.
Right, and for it to be out of your hands now at this point, where you're like, oh, I don't even get the choice to decide if I want to go closer to this thing. The slow movement and feeling of loss of control that's what's so scary about it to
definitely. Me. You're on the ride.
Right, yeah. And so she leads Ray into Alice's room, where she sees Alice sitting in the wicker chair at the end of the bed, looking sad. There's a really nice counter image with the empty chair there on the actual screen. I think it's really powerful, really good stuff.
Way better than if she was actually sitting in the chair.
Yeah, definitely. So they hold a seance a few days later, recorded as well. I find it very funny that this is framed to give you just enough of the doorway for Alice to be visible, but also it's very effective. Like, being like, oh, it's funny that this is there framed this way, you're like, it's gonna fucking work. I know I'm waiting for this ghost now.
Totally.
And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, and I have mentioned it, but the distance of the spooky figure in all of these videos and photos is what is so scary about it. It's the same thing that you've seen in other horror movies where you're like, oh, wait, there's something in the background there. Is way scarier than if just, popped up into the front of the camera, and it goes, bah,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, this thing is like hiding back there.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
spooky.
It's really great. Yeah. Spooky for sure. Russell claims that this new footage was very different, significantly more detailed, less ambiguous, impossible to dismiss as shadow play and digital noise. There was something inexplicable in our house that was beyond death. And I thought it was so funny, clearly very purposely funny, that this is followed up by Ray being like, yeah, I was concerned. like the intensity of what Russell is saying. And then Ray is very funny to me.
Yeah.
There's another little digression that happens where everyone's like, we thought Ray was bilking these poor saps. And he's like, hey, what am I, Rasputin over here?
Yeah, totally. He feels like a Nathan For You character, or he feels like just an oddball character that you would find in one of these documentaries where you're like, I don't know what this guy's intentions are. Obviously, he has some sort of hole in him that needs to be filled by helping his family.
His actual interiority is a question mark entirely still. So,
totally.
Yeah, really great stuff. They see her again in several reflections, though some are more visible than others. And suddenly there's more footage of April 3rd, the day Bob Smeat purportedly caught Alice on camera at the dam.
Yeah.
And what's this? Computer enhance. That's not Alice at all. It's Matthew.
Yeah. Now, what were your thoughts the first time seeing this when you found out that Matthew was there that day?
I thought that he was trying to drum up interest in it and because he thought that she was alive potentially, that he had been because it's now a while since then, since this image was caught, and since he didn't have that closure, that he was like, if I make it look like she might be alive, then whatever dragging investigation might pick up again. We might be able to increase our chances of finding her if it looks like she's still in the area.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very sad. I mean, it's a very sad thing that's happening for him.
Yeah, definitely. This is sort of the first of the reveals of this movie where it's like the person that you thought was in this image that we told you was in this image is not the person. And it sort of sets everything up for the viewer to be like, okay, what is the truth and what I'm seeing, right? And that sort of sets you up for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and he admits that not only was that him, but that he was also behind the sightings of Alice, compositing her into the photos, dressing up in her sweater and walking across the hall. What you see is basically Alice on television in the mirrors. Mm-hmm. He said that he wanted to help his mom, who's keen on exhuming the body, but that won't happen without evidence. So bingo, bango, bongo.
Right. And again, that's just when that happens, you're just like, oh, this is just a really sad portrait of a grieving family, right? Like, it's that thing of documentaries have sometimes where the reveal is just that, it's just a really sad story.
Right. Yeah. They're like, oh, this was never even happening.
Yeah. Catfish comes to mind, right? The ending of the film Catfish. You're just like, oh, this is just really bleak. It's not scary. It's just bleak, right?
It is also worth noting that when we revisit the footage in the hall, the reason it looks more like Matthew this time is because they literally shot it twice, once with each actor.
Oh.
Brawley said, you think, how could I have not seen it was Matthew all along? You start to question the way you've been looking at the images yourself, and that is a very deliberate orchestration.
Totally.
We're meant to question how subjective interpretation, influenced by new knowledge, can shape reality. Very integral to the immediate ending of this movie.
Totally.
For sure. I think that they do a great job with that.
It's so crazy how much thought goes into something like this. It's hard to know unless you've made something, but even just to make something like this, which feels very lo-fi and low budget and is sort of a hidden gem that a lot of people don't know about, is just an immense amount of thought and preparation and the thing with feeding it through the VHS 10 times to get it to look a certain way. It's just everything in this movie turns out to be deliberate on the filmmaker's part. It's really pretty mind-blowing.
There's a great moment here where the digital grain on Alice's face makes her look like a skull, and Matthew defends his efforts to resurrect his sister, in quotes, resurrect,
right,
saying the wearing her jacket and going to places she'd go, manifesting her in photos, it wasn't about trying to trick people. It's that something was better than nothing. And June doesn't really believe him, and everyone can see that she's devastated by this because she wasn't ready to give up Allie but this was the end of hope as far as they were concerned.
Yeah.
These photos that were meant to provide hope instead cement that she is in fact dead and that it was Matthew faking. So tragic.
I think it's interesting, too, how they don't seem to be mad at Matthew. They seem to sort of understand what he was doing and sort of accept it like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's something that a grieving brother would do. You know, they're not like, why would you do this? You know, you tricked us. They're kind of just like, yeah, that's just
we're all fucked up right now.
Yeah, yeah.
The relationship between Alice and June is explored a bit more here, including June's guilt. People say that they didn't really get along too much because they were too similar, which is very relatable.
Yeah.
They had their own private life that they choose to share or not share. They said that they're kind of difficult to know. And there's a fucked up moment or a fucked up mom-ent, if you will, where June's mother almost agrees that June is to blame, saying that she didn't give herself fully to June, and that might have passed on. Yeah. And if June had been more loving, then maybe Alice would still be alive. And you're like, first of all, obviously playing into this whole generational trauma being passed on thing, but to lash out in this way, I mean, understandably, she's hurting as well. She lost her granddaughter, but to say, if my daughter had loved her a little more, maybe she'd be alive is just so hurtful to everybody and just really impactful.
A lot of times in these situations, there's finger pointing, there's blame being assigned.
Right.
That part really hit me, of just like a mother or a grandmother admitting that, like, yeah, I never really loved this person like I should have. I wasn't able to give myself to this person, and I hope that they know that I love them, because I'm not sure if they did. You're just like, oh God, that is tragic.
Oh, gut punch.
Gut punch, totally. This movie hits you all over. It hits you in the gut, it hits you in the heart, it hits you in the brain, in the amygdala, you know, it
everywhere.
Really,
kicks your ass.
Yeah, totally.
There's a really interesting moment tucked into this scene where we see the footage of the scene that Russell described earlier as a memory, with Alice noticing him and getting tense, then saying, get out, get out. We see it as home video from Matthew. And it reinforces this question of image's relationship to reality. Because you can say he created a false memory, but in another sense, he has transposed these images from the footage onto his own memories. So while he's not necessarily lying, he's also less reliable than previously thought, and it prompts reflection on how much of this ghost is similarly a blend of reality and fiction. How much of it is willing to see the signs of a ghost in order to have this tenuous relationship to someone still exist.
For sure. It also can be read as setting up the sort of time jumping, reality bending aspect of things where maybe these things are not linear. Maybe it's a circle. Oh, he saw something now that happened in the past that he didn't know about, maybe.
That's true. Maybe it was like an echo of that situation happening there.
Yeah.
Interesting. Matthew and Ray go off on a psychic road trip, which is fun.
Yeah, and at this point, at least for me, I was like, okay, it's fully in the realm of possibility in this movie that Ray is like a pedo, right?
For sure. And while he's away, Matthew comes to terms with his grief. He says he was almost one of Ray's clients as well. Things take a turn, though, when they come back to find more footage seeming to show Alice standing there over June while she sleeps, and without Matthew in the house, it couldn't have been the same fakery.
Yeah.
Which sends June poring over the footage again, and she sees the second figure in the hallway footage, and similar to me, assumes it's Alice at first. You go, holy shit, it's the real ghost. But then wait a second, computer enhance again.
Yeah, the truth is even scarier.
Our neighbor, Brett Toohey.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
This scare really got me, because you don't know anything about why anybody else would be in the house at that moment.
Right.
You're just like, oh, this isn't a ghost in the house. There was a person in my house I had no idea was there. Is so terrifying. And this is the part I was talking about earlier, where as it's enhancing, as it's zooming on his face is like flickering with the grain and the noise of the quality of the image. and it looks like he's making all these strange, ghostly, terrifying faces. He doesn't even really resemble a person. He resembles sort of a spirit as well.
Yeah, for sure. And they think he's looking for something, and so they go to look for it, and they find it immediately. A hidden safe containing a diary and a sex tape between Tui, his wife, and Alice, who babysat for them.
Yeah. Who I believe is a minor, correct?
Yeah, she's 16, right, yeah.
Right.
So it's definitely statutory rape. The thing that complicates it is that she seems to be comfortable, and so the police aren't going to pursue the Tuis, who moved away 6 months after her death.
The six was consensual, right? That's what he says. And it seems consensual in the tape. But again, it's that thing of like, if you're under 18, how much consenting can you actually do, right?
Exactly.
I want to also say really quick, the safe that they find the stuff in is a creepy giant hole in the wall in Alice's room. That is very creepy. I don't know if it's in Paranormal Activity 2 or 3. There's a similar sort of thing in the person's room that's like a little crawl space almost in the bedroom where you're just like, I don't want to go in there.
There's nothing good in that crawl space.
Yeah, totally. I just wanted to mention that the little safe area creeped me out. I wouldn't want a little hole in my bedroom like that in the wall.
For sure. The two parents try to reckon with this. June is sad and sort of positioned as a counter to Russell, where she's wondering if Alice was in love with Brett, while he's unwilling to accept that 16-year-olds might be interested in sexual experimentation.
Right.
He's unwilling to see her as not daddy's little girl almost.
Right.
And he suggests that Alice's death was a suicide. And he says, as far as I'm concerned, the Tuis were complicit in Alice's death.
Right.
If it hadn't been for them, she would have reached out to us. She wouldn't have felt guilty. She wouldn't have felt the burden of that secret, and she wouldn't have been isolated.
Yeah.
And what makes that so fascinating to me is because the way that I read this movie, we don't really have any evidence that she felt guilt or shame about this, or that she wanted them to find out. Because, I mean, they claim that Alice hid the tape so poorly because she wanted them to understand her better, but I don't know why she would necessarily want them to know about her sex life. It, to me, feels like a projection of their own judgment about her actions. Because if you asked me to describe someone who was off having threesomes, I'd probably say a fun-loving girl with a zest for life.
Yeah, it is very interesting, and it comes back later. It's sort of that thing, this introduction of this idea that, oh, this girl contained multitudes. And there's a line later in the movie where one of the friends is talking about how there were all these different versions of this person.
That's right.
Some were public, some were private, and it's true. I mean, like you were saying before, like people being flattened in death when, in reality, even especially someone like a 16-year-old girl is sort of unknowable to a certain extent, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's Kim. She says, secrets change the way you see somebody. Each of us knew one Alice. I knew one. Her mom knew another. And there was one, again, that none of us knew. This is that private life that June had, that her mother had talked about being unwilling to share with people. They examine the journal that they found as well. And June finds Ray's business card taped all the way back in 2005. And they're like, what the fuck, Ray?
Yeah, that was weird.
It was. And I mean, Ray says he was just honoring her request for confidentiality, but it's very understandable the resentment that they feel about this deceit. Because, I mean, a lie by omission, at least, because his earnestness with which he throws himself into things like the seance and all this.
Yeah.
Make it feel very scummy.
Yeah. You don't really understand the intentions of why Alice went to see Ray 5 months before she died. All you know is she went to see Ray, she had a session, he knew of her, and then 5 months later when she died, he threw himself into this family dynamic after her death without letting them know that he had any idea of who she was or anything about her. And so the audience is also questioning, like, why did Alice go see Ray? What was she doing? It just throws more mystery into everything.
And we get to listen to her taped session, which is very scary. And she says something very similar to June's nightmares, which creates the possibility that they aren't just grief. She says, I had a dream last night. I was cold and wet and I felt heavy like I'd been drugged. And when I woke up, the sensations didn't go. I was feeling sick and confused and I was starting to get scared. I needed to see Mom, to talk to her. I stumbled to her room and I stood there at her bed. And as I stood there watching her, I was overcome by this intense sadness. And then the sadness turned to fear. I just stood there, paralyzed with fear, and I realized there was nothing that they could do for me anymore. I've never felt so utterly alone. Yeah. Everything felt wrong. My body, the way things looked. Then I realized there was something wrong with me. I started to cry standing there. Yeah. And what's so interesting and so powerful to me about this description is that, unlike June's description, in Alice's version, it's not what's seen, but what's felt that makes it terrifying. She doesn't know that she's dead or that she's drowned. It's this mystery. She can't see the wet, bloated, drowned person, right? But is conscious of the psychological and physical sensations of it. Right. And so while she doesn't see herself, she becomes aware that she seems to be in her own body, this confusion, this fear, this sadness, the movement, and she becomes conscious that there is something wrong. Yeah. Of a breakdown, a separation between her psyche and the body that she's in. So to boil it down, Alice feels like she's a stranger in her body, while June sees the stranger in her body. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. That has a metaphorical connotation to disassociation due to trauma, right? Mm-hmm. Not feeling like you're in your own body. Right. Or feeling like the body that you're in is not the body that you see in the mirror, right? Right. Image issues. These are all things that girls of this age, women, experience. It's a very interesting parallel there between this ghost metaphor and what happens when you've experienced some form of trauma, what happens in your body. The other interesting thing here is this is another situation where Alice is saying this stuff 5 months before she dies, right? Right, right. So she is sort of seeing the future without knowing it. And this sort of is one of the beginning things where you're like, oh, there's a time aspect here at play where things are happening in the past and the future and the present sort of simultaneously. This person is being haunted by herself, kind of things. It's very weird. Yeah, and I think that the way that it's playing with all these time elements, to me, that plays also into the generational aspect of this whole story, where it's like, oh, it's happening in the past, the present, the future. Oh, it's happening in Grandma, in Mom, in Alice. And it does create this link between them again, this potential psychic capability, which doesn't seem to be a good thing, seems to be a trauma between them that is also passed down. Not only this reserved nature, but this psychic ability is its own generational trauma. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we know horror explores these things in metaphor, but this movie does it so subtly. These are like things that you don't even pick up on until you're talking about them. There's such a depth to this movie and its meaning. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it sticks with people, is because there is a lot to, I mean, you even DM me, like, there is a lot to unpack here. And there really is, Yeah. The next 4 days in August of 2005 are labeled Lake Mungo, wherein she had attended a school camping trip at the Australian dry lake, memorable to her parents because Alice returned without several beloved possessions, including her brand new phone. These damn kids always losing their phones. Her phone, her necklace, and her bracelet, right? Yeah, all of her treasures. By the way, when they turn the page in the schedule in the calendar and it just says Lake Mungo in big red font for 4 days, you're just like, oh, God. Oh, God. It's terrifying. The name Lake Mungo is scary. It also just really feels like you feel the culmination of the story coming. Yeah, it does such a great job of signaling the climax of this movie. It's just really well done. Yeah, this is the part where I start going, last night when I'm rewatching, I start going, okay, the really fucked up scary part is right around the corner and I'm just dreading it. Yeah, time to sturdy myself here.
Yeah, totally. And I did have to pause it before we're going to get to it, but before this thing happens, I had to pause it and I had to steel myself. And watching it for the first time and not knowing what's coming, there's an entire Reddit thread that just says that one scene in Lake Mungo. And it's just everybody talking about, these are like horror heads, and they're just talking about this sequence really fucked me up.
It's really, really, I mean, we talked about the gut punches before. This rips you right open.
Yeah.
Joel Anderson, again, the director, he explained, we wanted locations that had both a sense of beauty and a sense of menace. Dying is a form of being lost, and these extraordinary places that feel haunted and so ancient perfectly reflect this. I think that they absolutely do. It's a very eerie environment.
I keep looking behind me. I'm at the point now where I'm getting scared to not see what's behind me. I'm starting to look behind me. It's right
Watch
behind me.
Watch out for any drowned peoples.
Yeah, God. Yeah. Yeah, and Mungo, yeah, the environment, I mean, and even the first shot you see on the friend's cell phone footage of the party that they're having at Lake Mungo, there's just like this weird sort of structure, like a teepee, like a weird, it just feels very uncanny right off the bat. You're just like, this feels wrong for me to be watching this footage. This doesn't feel real. It feels like they're in some sort of weird dimension out in the middle of nowhere.
And you're having a strain to see it because of the blurriness of the cell phone footage. It just really creates this really interesting draw.
Yeah, this is not iPhone footage. This is this is 240p.
That's right. If that.
Yeah.
The footage, though, does show Alice looking sad. She buries something. She walks around weird. And the Palmers trace the spot at Lake Mungo, and they go to the burial site, and they unearth Alice's most precious things. Like we said, her favorite necklace, the bracelet, and her phone, which enables us to finally, over an hour in, get the first glimpse of footage from her perspective.
Yeah.
This is such an interesting way to flip the script a little bit. Yeah. And so much of this movie is people talking about Alice.
Yeah.
That to finally get a glimpse into her virtual eye, her new flesh eye, so to speak, is just very powerful and does create that dread without even knowing what's coming.
You're really put into her shoes. It's first person perspective. This cell phone footage, you know, it does feel like you're the person walking down this road.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. There are a few things you should never do in a horror movie, right? And a lot of them are in this movie. If you find a buried cell phone, don't look at the footage on it.
Right.
Don't walk around Lake Mungo at night filming on a bad cell phone.
That's the number one rule as far as I'm concerned.
The list goes on and on. But here we are. We're trapped. We're on the ride. And we're watching Alice's cell phone footage of her walking down this dirt road in the dark. And then
it's interspersed with recordings as well of her consultation with Ray for dream analysis. She repeats the bit at the beginning about how she feels like something bad has happened and is coming for her, as, yes, terrifyingly, a figure comes for her and it's her own dang waterlogged corpse self.
Yeah.
Truly awful, horrific, terrifying.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare. It's truly a nightmare.
So the footage starts, you're just walking slowly down this dirt path. You see this figure clad in white in the distance. You're getting closer to it. It's just standing there.
Yeah.
Right? Then the figure starts coming toward you and you realize that it's the drowned Alice. And then it cuts to Alice, drowned Alice, charging at the camera, making this awful sound. And it is one of the most effective scares of any movie. It reminds me of the guy behind the diner in Mulholland Drive.
Classic. The Winky Scare.
Which, for me, is one of the scariest things of all time. This scare is what this whole movie's been building to, but it is just one of the most effective scares, I think, ever, in my opinion.
It's very effective. And it's so funny to me that despite being so out of nowhere, it does kind of feel earned to me. Like they've drawn you in with this slow pace this whole time. And then you spend that goodwill on one good jump scare like that, and I'm like, you earned it. You did it. This is fine. I'm on board for this jump scare.
It's the climax, and it explains everything. And now you are really faced with the reality of, oh, this girl was literally haunted by herself. She may not have known it was herself. Some people think she knew she was going to die. Some people in the movie just think that she saw something out there. But you, as the viewer, realize Alice was haunted by her own ghost, which, I'm sure other horror things have explored before, but it feels very unique and fresh in this movie to be faced with your own spirit in that way. And that's sort of the point of no return for this character.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, Ray had said, where I come from, whenever someone then dies, they block out all the mirrors to keep them from finding their way back. And here, the cell phone has become that mirror. It brings the spirit through that tortures Alice, while also intersecting with technology's ability to disrupt linear sequentiality and visit the past, which of course simply cements her prophecy. So she's seen her future in the dream. Then through this video, it implies that much like a dream seems real, the truth about technology's relationship to reality is much more complex than just looking at a screen and saying, oh, there it is.
Right.
It's really interesting.
It's the past, present, and future all at once, which is how grief manifests as well, right?
The family has kind of a bizarre reaction, in my opinion, which is instead of going, wow, that's a truly fucked up confirmation of my daughter's premonition, they return and say, I believe she saw a ghost. Oh, well, at least the bad feeling in our house is gone.
Right.
I think that part of what makes this movie so interesting to me is that it's possible to read this as less literally, I think, as that they see on this footage something that confirms Alice is not who they thought she was.
Right.
And that they have given up on their grief that was holding them back, not because of any healthy processing, but because they are now ashamed of Alice. That the girl that they were mourning didn't even exist, almost. Russell even says, we collectively decided to move forward and will be moving literally as well. And hey, we even welcomed Ray back into our lives.
Yeah.
They truly regress.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like that version of their daughter is gone, figuratively, and also literally, that version of their daughter is gone from their house and from their lives, right?
Right. June does one final session with Ray, another hypnotized house exploration, which is interspersed with Allie's session reflecting the opposite perspective.
Yeah.
She found herself sitting in a chair in her bedroom as her mother enters, but, quote, I don't think she knows I'm there. And she watches her leave again. Probably doesn't connect to the refusal to see the real her that I was just discussing.
Yeah. This part has, I think, the most impactful line in the movie, and I'm probably going to misquote it, but so the mom is going into the room and Allie's not there. And then from Allie's perspective, she's like, my mom is in the room. She doesn't know I'm here. And then the mom says something like, she's not here or she's gone. Forget exactly what she says, but it's just like that whole part is like one of the craziest parts of the movie to me.
Especially because earlier we had heard June's description of this scene and she saw her in the chair.
Right.
And so now when she goes down the hall into Alice's room, enters, comes out of the trance very abruptly and very stone-faced says, she wasn't there.
Right.
It almost feels like she's, going down further down this path of what I am choosing to interpret this metaphor. She's like refusing to see her now, as her daughter feared, because the secret life, this interiority, has changed her opinion of Alice. Before, when June went in earlier, she said, I saw Alice and she looked sad.
Yeah. And
the reason that she looked sad is because her relationship with her family was shallow enough that something not really that crazy, it's crazy for a 16-year-old, but ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, forgivable at the very least, was enough for them to cast her aside. She felt like a stranger to them, and upon getting to know her better, her family decides, we'd rather not, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the reason why she stopped haunting them is because they found out about the thing with the neighbor and they found out about the Lake Mungo footage. But the reason why she's not there in their minds is because they know all this stuff. Our daughter is dead to us.
Yeah.
And she's like, I want you guys to know all of this stuff so that you know who I am. It's an interesting thing where their motives are like in total conflict with each other, but the result is the same, right?
Right. And at the end of the movie, we return to the photo of the family before they leave, and there's now a clearly visible Alice just chilling inside. She doesn't seem interested in contacting her family. She's just watching them leave. Like she realized in her dream, there was nothing they could do for her anymore. And we get the credits, which also include more sightings that couldn't have been Matt.
Yeah, that ending shot of the slow zoom in to the first family photo and she's in the window, you're just like, oh, God. And then over the credits, you get all these other sightings where Alice isn't where we thought she was in all the times we first saw these things. She's in a completely different part of the photo of the video. And you're just like, oh, my God, this is crazy.
And so through my lens, between Matt's reality manipulation and June seeming to have some level of psychic ability, they did bring Alice back from the dead to live in their house, which seemed like what they wanted. But instead of feeling closer to her, now knowing the hell that she went through with the premonitions in the months leading to her death, the Palmers have turned their back on her. They're freed from the guilt and moving away, while Alice is stuck there, isolated and damned because of her family's unwillingness to accept her.
Yeah.
It's a really tragic ending for Alice in particular.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a heartbreaking movie. And the fact that we're talking about this movie like this, even though we know that it was scripted and made by filmmakers, but it really just hits you the way a documentary would. You know, you feel like these are real people, you care about them, you care about Alice, and knowing that she's like cursed to be the ghost forever with no connection to her family or the outside world, you're just like, oh my God, this is...
It's so great. It's really great. And the credits roll and there's a very scary stinger where the screen flashes a few times and she's standing there very still at Lake Mungo in the shadows, and it's a very scary dismount.
I did not watch until that point.
Wow, you gotta go back.
I
gotta check that out. It's very scary.
Oh, God. Okay. I had no idea that even existed.
Oh, yeah. Gotta watch through the credits.
Okay. Yeah, I gotta stay for the after credits scene, I guess. Jeez.
That's right. And now, Max, we have reached the part of the episode where we sum up why this isn't just a good horror movie,
right,
but is, in fact, the best horror movie ever made. And I'm going to let you start.
Okay. Well, I think the fact that it was made with such limited resources in such a lo-fi, low-budget way about such a small story, yeah, the themes are so universal, and it's so effective, and its atmosphere and dread, and its scare is so effective. It just really shows how much can be done with so little. And it's sort of like the most minimalist horror movie there is in a lot of ways. You know, it's like a primal minimalist horror. It's tight. It's 87 minutes.
Ooh, love it.
You watch it once, you're never going to forget it. It's fun to watch. It's not boring. Yeah, I mean, a lot of horror movies try to be maximalist and scary by showing you everything and having this big bloated budget, and this epic horror movie, you know, like something like It comes to mind, right? And I just feel like this is like the antithesis of that, where it's just like, this is all in your head, and what's scary is what you're thinking. I think that this movie is a really good example of that. So
yeah, absolutely. To me, this is the best horror movie ever made because it is a totally unique, genre-shaking, form-bending movie. It is totally its own thing, and that might be enough for a lot of movies to be satisfied with just doing that. But to be so thematically rich, and have so much to dig into, done so subtly, like you described. For this movie to have the soil to even grow these thematic trees is incredible. And what it has to say is interesting as well.
Right.
It leans into the idea that holding onto a concept of someone instead of who they really are can be punishing for both of you.
Yeah.
The initial punishment here is from supernatural forces, but ultimately, the final moments of this movie are an act of cruelty from the living as well.
Yeah.
It implies that our protagonist family are the cause of the haunting because of their refusal to let go. But then when they get some information that changes their perspective, they literally get confirmation of the ghost's presence. They move away. They trap the ghost in the most extreme form of isolation possible, which they've deemed an appropriate fate for someone more transgressive than their initial understanding of them.
Yeah.
And for it to just so deftly have this entire tragedy happening underneath it, on top of just being like a scary mockumentary,
right,
is fucking incredible. Like,
it really is astounding. It's so impressive. Yeah, it's so hard to make something good, especially with limited resources. I'm speaking from experience that the fact that this movie even exists is kind of a miracle.
Absolutely.
And the fact that we know about it and are talking about it 10 years later, I mean, that's all you need to know.
Absolutely. Great stuff. And now, Max, plug time. Tell the folks listening at home anything you want to point them towards, social media, any projects that you want to plug.
Sure.
Free time.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Max Beasley. 2 Ys on Instagram, I think 3 Ys on Twitter. I have a movie that I made last year, a short film starring Demorge Brown called John Tarzan that I think the link is in my Twitter bio for. It's about a alcoholic private eye in the early 70s who was supposed to be investigating this case of this missing girl, but all you can focus on is that his girlfriend left him that morning.
Talk about texture as well.
That was a big focus on that, is I just wanted it to be really textural.
Mission accomplished.
So, thanks, man. Yeah. So, yeah, I would say that those are my plugs, and I have my show dates and stuff on my Instagram. So, you
definitely check them out.
There. Yeah.
Definitely check it out. As far as my plugs, you can check out more episodes of the Best Little Horror House in Philly, including a very fun one about Mulholland Drive, if people are interested in that. My friend Jess came on, and we had a really great conversation about that as well. So I'll point you towards that. And if you're really enjoying the show, there's a Patreon with all kinds of fun bonus episodes. Sometimes we do spotlights of movies that don't necessarily fit directly into best horror movie ever made, but also sometimes we do other things, like we talk about video games, or we talk about books, or we talk about our top 10 Simpsons Treehouse of Horror segments from the first 10 seasons. Like,
nice.
Truly anything and everything
Yeah.
happens over there. So you can check out all kinds of fun stuff for very cheap, considering the amount of work that goes into it.
Yeah, subscribe to this man's Patreon, please.
And Twitter, Little Horror PHL. That username implies pretty much everywhere. Letterboxd, Instagram, all the places. That's it. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.